On a warm summer evening in July 1996, the skies above Long Island, New York were calm and clear. Families were boarding flights for vacations abroad. Business travelers were returning home or setting out on new ventures. And one of the most famous planes in the TWA Fleet, a Boeing 747 named the Star of the Desert, was preparing for a routine transatlantic journey. Flight 800 was bound for Paris, a flight that had been made countless times before without incident. But on that night, July 17th, within just 12 minutes of leaving the runway, the airplane would vanish from radar in a brilliant flash of fire. The explosion tore the aircraft apart, scattering debris across the Atlantic Ocean and taking with it 230 lives. It was one of the deadliest aviation disasters in American history. And yet, nearly 3 decades later, the cause of the tragedy remains a matter of intense debate, mystery, and controversy. Tonight, we're going to walk through the events of that fateful evening, the investigation that followed, the haunting, human stories, and the swirling conspiracy theories that continue to this day. Before we begin, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves uncovering hidden history, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Flight 800 was a scheduled passenger flight operated by Trans World Airlines, or TWA, one of the most recognizable American airlines of the 20th century. The aircraft that carried those 230 passengers and crew was a Boeing 747-100, one of the most popular and trusted jumbo jets of its time. On that day, the jet was set to depart from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York and head across the Atlantic to Paris, with a stopover in Rome. The passengers on board were a mix of vacationers, students, and business travelers. Among them were 16 high school students and 5 adult chaperones from Montourville, Pennsylvania, who were excitedly embarking on a school trip to France. Families were looking forward to reunions, couples were eager for romantic holidays. For everyone boarding that flight, it was supposed to be a normal trip. The plane, Flight 800, lifted off at 8:19 p.m. 12 minutes later, witnesses across Long Island saw something they would never forget. Many described a streak of light shooting through the sky, followed by a deafening explosion. The massive jet broke apart mid-air, scattering burning debris across the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of East Mauritius. The fiery wreckage rained down into the sea, lighting up the night sky. There were no survivors. The magnitude of the disaster stunned the nation. Families gathered in anguish, waiting for news that never came. In total, 212 passengers and 18 crew members lost their lives. It was, at the time, the second deadliest plane crash in U.S. history, surpassed only by the 1979 crash of American Airlines Flight 191 in Chicago. In the immediate aftermath, speculation swirled. Initial reports from witnesses, hundreds of whom claimed to see a streak of light or what looked like a missile rising toward the plane, fueled theories of a terrorist attack. This was only months after the Oklahoma City bombing and just a few years after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, so the United States was already on edge. Rumors of a missile strike spread quickly, and some even whispered about a possible U.S. Navy training accident. The National Transportation Safety Board and the FBI launched one of the most extensive and expensive investigations in aviation history. The recovery effort itself was massive. Wreckage was pulled from the ocean piece by piece, and the remains of the victims were carefully collected and returned to their families. The fuselage was painstakingly reconstructed in a hangar in Calverton, New York, becoming a haunting puzzle of twisted metal that investigators hoped would reveal the truth. As evidence was analyzed, the NTSB focused on the center wing fuel tank. The tank had been nearly empty, with just a small amount of fuel sloshing around. In the warm July heat, vapors built up inside, creating a highly flammable environment. The board concluded that a spark, most likely caused by faulty wiring, had ignited the vapors, leading to a catastrophic explosion. The official report, released in 2000 after 4 years of investigation and more than 400 witnesses interviewed, declared that the tragedy was caused by a center wing fuel tank explosion. But even as the NTSB closed the case, questions remained. Why had so many eyewitnesses, more than 200 of them, described seeing a streak of light, something that looked like a missile, rising toward the aircraft? The FBI initially pursued this possibility, investigating whether a terrorist attack or even friendly fire could have brought down Flight 800. Several witnesses along Long Island's South Shore swore they saw what looked like a flare, or rocket, streaking up to the jet before the explosion. The government's conclusion was that what people saw was likely burning fuel streaming from the aircraft after the explosion. The fiery trail, they argued, created the illusion of a missile, but not everyone bought that explanation. Over the years, skeptics have raised questions about the investigation, suggesting evidence was mishandled, eyewitness accounts dismissed, or that authorities were covering up a missile strike, perhaps even a U.S. Navy training accident gone wrong. The theories range from the plausible to the conspiratorial. Some claimed a terrorist group had fired a surface-to-air missile at the plane, but no evidence of a missile strike was ever found in the wreckage. Others pointed to the Navy's presence in the area that night and speculated about a misfired missile during exercises. The U.S. government has consistently denied these claims, but for many, the eyewitness reports remain difficult to ignore. Beyond the cause, what makes Flight 800 so haunting is the human cost. Among the passengers were the 16 high school students and 5 teachers from Montourville Area High School. They were on their way to Paris for a school trip, full of excitement, many of them traveling abroad for the first time. Their small town in Pennsylvania was devastated, with nearly every resident knowing someone on board. Memorials still stand, today in their honor. Another story is that of 18-year-old Callie Dugan and her best friend Monique Roman, who were also heading to Paris for a study program. Their families had supported the trip as an educational adventure. Instead, it became a heartbreaking loss that rippled through their community. Among the passengers was also Paris-bound flight attendant Jill Ziemkiewicz, only 23 years old, whose warmth and kindness were remembered by both passengers and colleagues. Perhaps the most famous story is that of TWA Flight 800 passenger Courtney Johns, an 18-year-old from Montourville. Her brother, Jeff Johns, would later become one of the most influential writers at DC Comics, creating the superhero Stargirl as a tribute to his sister. Through that character, he ensured her memory would live on, inspiring audiences with her courage and light. The tragedy forced the aviation industry to take a hard look at aircraft safety. The conclusion that an electrical spark ignited fuel vapors in the center wing tank led to sweeping reforms. Airlines were ordered to replace wiring, add insulation, and eventually adopt a new system called the nitrogen inerting system. This system replaces oxygen in nearly empty fuel tanks with nitrogen gas, greatly reducing the risk of explosion. In 2008, the FAA mandated that all new passenger planes be equipped with these systems, and existing aircraft were required to retrofit them. Experts believe this was one of the most important safety improvements since the early days of jet travel. Yet, despite the official explanation, the conspiracy theories persist. Books, documentaries, and even a controversial 2013 film titled TWA Flight 800 have continued to question the findings, pointing to those eyewitness reports of a missile-like streak in the sky. Some argue that the government suppressed evidence to cover up a Navy training accident, while others suggest a terrorist attack was hidden from the public to avoid panic. The NTSB has repeatedly stood by its conclusion, citing physical evidence that showed no signs of a missile strike. Independent reviews by outside experts, including one by NASA, have supported this finding. But for some families and skeptics, the unanswered questions and the sheer number of witness accounts leave room for doubt. For the families of the victims, however, the central truth is much more personal. They lost loved ones in an instant with no chance for goodbyes. In Montourville, a memorial stands with the names of the 21 students and teachers who never returned home. For them, the debate over missiles and fuel tanks is less important than remembering the lives that were lost. The legacy of Flight 800 is complex. On one hand, it led to tangible safety improvements that have likely prevented similar disasters. On the other, it left a scar on American aviation history, one that continues to stir emotions, conspiracy theories, and questions about trust in government agencies. Nearly 30 years later, the reconstructed fuselage of the Star of Athens has been moved from Long Island to a facility in Virginia, where it serves as a training tool for aviation safety experts. Families still gather each year to honor the memories of those they lost. And yet, every anniversary brings back not just grief, but also a renewed debate. Was it really just a tragic accident, or was the full truth never told? As we reflect on this story, we're reminded of how fragile life is, and how, even decades later, unanswered questions can haunt us as much as the tragedy itself. So now I'll ask you, what do you believe happened to TWA Flight 800? Was it truly an accident or something more? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this story compelling, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into history's most haunting mysteries. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop seeking the truth.